You know your HOA Karen has officially lost it when she's on a ladder in your driveway at 10 in the morning smearing pink paint directly on your security camera, yelling about digital oppression, not knowing that same camera is live streaming her face to a 65-inch monitor inside the local police station, where 3 officers just dropped their coffee and started laughing. It had started as a quiet Thursday. I was sipping my coffee, updating some firewall protocols on my laptop, and prepping for a remote IT consultation when I got a ping from the real-time security app I'd co-developed for the county sheriff's department. A motion alert on my home cam. Nothing unusual in my neighborhood, especially since my place sits right near the community gate. Most motion alerts were just delivery trucks or raccoons. But this one? This one had bright pink brushstrokes across the lens and a shrill voice yelling about privacy rights and neighborhood surveillance tyranny. It only took a second for me to realize the woman in the feed was none other than Karen Rothschild, the HOA secretary and self-proclaimed guardian of suburban morality. And she was painting over my camera, in broad daylight, with a gallon of hot pink house paint and a brush that looked like it had seen war. This wasn't just a prank. It wasn't even the usual petty HOA power trip. This was a declaration of war on electronics, logic, and common decency. I immediately pulled up the live feed, and to my satisfaction, every camera on my property was still working perfectly. She had managed to coat one lens with what looked like a child's art project gone rogue, but the others were positioned at different angles, capturing her every move. I tapped into the cloud-linked feed streaming directly to the precinct, a test project that had gone live only 3 days prior. Karen had no idea her face was currently in high definition at the local station, being watched by officers who had just started their shift. But to explain how we got here, you've got to understand 2 things. First, I'm Jake Mercer, software engineer, cyber defense contractor, and the poor soul who thought moving into a quiet gated community outside Austin would mean fewer headaches. Second, Karen has been my unsolicited nemesis since day one. The moment I moved in, she came over, not with brownies or a welcome basket, but with a printed list of HOA violations I was on the verge of committing. Things like having my recycling bin visible on Wednesdays and trimming my hedge too square. She was like a Roomba set to find problems mode. And she had zero chill about it. At first, I ignored her. Then I installed security cameras. Not because I feared crime, but because I feared Karen. And wouldn't you know it, within a week of installing them, she started walking her dog past my property 10 times a day, always staring into the lenses like she expected lasers to shoot out. Her Pomeranian, Colonel Puffs, even started growling at my mailbox like it owed him money. It escalated from her muttering Orwellian trash under her breath to her organizing an HOA petition to ban surveillance tech in our neighborhood. She only got 3 signatures. One was her own. So when I volunteered my home as a pilot site for the police department's new Civic Safe Link initiative, a beta program to help law enforcement reduce response time by integrating consenting home cameras, I knew Karen would implode. And she did. She left notes on my door. She left voicemail rants about spying on yoga moms. She even accused my mailbox of being a listening device. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to this. Watching her now, furiously flinging paint with the energy of a deranged mime, I grabbed my phone and called Deputy Rodriguez, the officer heading the SafeLink pilot. He picked up laughing. Apparently, the whole station was watching. Karen had just earned herself her own real-time highlight reel. "We've got her on 4 angles," Rodriguez said between chuckles. "And she's giving us a monologue too. Think she's auditioning for court." I stepped out onto my porch and waved toward her. She froze mid-swing, paintbrush dripping onto my driveway. The moment she saw me holding my phone and not looking the least bit surprised, her expression flickered, smug to stunned. She squinted, realizing for the first time that the other camera in the corner was still blinking. I didn't even have to say anything. She just dropped the brush like it burned her and stumbled off the ladder. "Oh, this isn't over, you corporate drone," she barked as she backed toward her house. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer. And the HOA." She stormed off, stepping in the same paint she'd just dumped, leaving pink footprints all the way to her lawn. I shook my head, walked back inside, and checked my inbox. Deputy Rodriguez had already sent a clip from the stream with the subject line, "Karen caught in 4K." Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip and I sat on my back porch sipping iced tea, a police cruiser quietly rolled up to her house. 2 officers stepped out, calm but firm. Karen answered the door wearing a bathrobe and holding a mug that said, "World's Realest Patriot." I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see her arm waving wildly. She pointed in my direction several times, then tried to pantomime a camera with her fingers. It was like watching interpretive dance fueled by caffeine and rage. After several minutes, the officers handed her a notice and walked away. She stood frozen, staring down at the document like it had personally betrayed her. A few hours later, my neighborhood group chat lit up. "Police at Karen's. She in trouble? Anyone know what happened?" Karen, true to form, posted a long-winded essay on her timeline blaming fascist technocrats for a digital assault on liberty. She claimed she was a whistleblower and that the cameras were psychologically aggressive. I nearly dropped my phone laughing. She even uploaded a blurry selfie next to the pink-smeared camera with the caption, "Warrior for Privacy." What she didn't know was that the footage she tried to block had already been archived, duplicated, and handed over to the city's legal office. Painting over a surveillance system connected to an active police feed was more than a violation. It bordered on obstruction of law enforcement. And because I had consented through legal channels to allow the feed, her actions weren't just offensive, they were criminal. As I reviewed the footage one last time before heading to bed, I noticed something peculiar. Karen had worn gloves, covered her hair, and clearly tried not to touch anything near the camera itself. She had planned this. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment outburst. She'd waited until I left for the store that morning, brought a ladder, and even scanned the angles. She'd underestimated the full setup, but she had tried to disable multiple cameras. And just like that, the situation was no longer just about property damage or neighborhood theatrics. Karen had crossed into legal territory she didn't understand. What began as a tantrum had become an investigation. And it was only just getting started. The next morning started with a sense of eerie quiet. Not the peaceful kind you enjoy with a cup of coffee, but the suspenseful kind that hangs in the air before something ridiculous explodes into chaos. I just finished feeding my dog Baxter when I saw the first sign something was off. Karen's flagpole, which usually flew some bizarre slogan or a parody of the American flag with glitter stars, was completely bare. Her curtains were drawn. Her yard, typically full of over-polished garden gnomes, was vacant. For someone who thrived on HOA drama, Karen was far too silent. I knew it wasn't over, and I was right. By mid-morning, 2 police officers returned to my property, not for me, but to update me on Karen's reaction. Officer Rodriguez and his partner had reviewed the footage again and confirmed that Karen's little pink paint protest wasn't a spontaneous tantrum but a calculated act of vandalism. What elevated it beyond mere property damage was the fact that she interfered with a live police surveillance stream that had been cleared through both the HOA and the city's crime prevention program. This meant she was potentially facing charges for tampering with digital infrastructure used in active municipal operations. Rodriguez explained that they had served her with a citation and a warning for now but were escalating the matter to the city prosecutor's office. I didn't want to gloat, but I'll be honest, it was satisfying to hear. I hadn't moved to this community for drama. I just wanted a quiet place with decent internet, somewhere to work from home and let my dog run in the yard without worrying about some self-declared suburban tyrant painting over my cameras. Karen had always treated my tech setup like it was an affront to her existence, as if every camera I installed chipped away at her soul. But now, she wasn't just angry, she was cornered. As news of the incident began spreading, our neighborhood group chat exploded again. Screenshots of Karen's pink-covered camera stunt started circulating like wildfire. Someone even turned it into a meme with the caption, "When Karen thinks she's Banksy but ends up on a police watch list." A few people were amused, but others were starting to worry. Was she going to retaliate against anyone else? Was she unstable? Around noon, things escalated further. A message from the HOA president, Greg, a tired man who had aged 15 years in HOA service, was sent out to all homeowners. He explained the situation without naming Karen directly but reminded everyone that vandalizing security infrastructure, especially those tied to city monitoring systems, was a serious violation of both HOA bylaws and local law. Karen, of course, responded to this with a new round of insanity. She showed up at my front yard an hour later with a megaphone. An actual megaphone. She stood on the sidewalk and shouted about surveillance oppression, private property violations, and how I was a corporate plant disguised as a homeowner. It would have been funny if it weren't so loud. She claimed the HOA was conspiring with law enforcement to harass her, and that my cameras were tracking her thoughts through facial heat analysis. I didn't even know what that meant. As neighbors peeked through their blinds or recorded her from their porches, she stood there screaming until the police returned. Again. This time, they were less amused. They asked her calmly to stop trespassing and disturbing the peace, but she wouldn't let up. She even tried to lie and say I'd installed a camera in her backyard tree. I hadn't. I wouldn't even step near her property without full hazmat gear and a court order. When they escorted her back toward her house, she turned around mid-walk and yelled over her shoulder, "You'll be hearing from my attorney. And the news. This is tyranny." Then she dramatically threw her megaphone into her recycling bin, which ironically had a sticker that said, HOA approved. I thought the day couldn't get more ridiculous, but then came the legal threat. That evening, I received a certified letter from a local law firm claiming they were representing Karen Rothschild in a case against me for unauthorized surveillance, emotional damage, and invasion of spiritual boundaries. I nearly choked laughing. Emotional damage I could maybe see, but spiritual boundaries? Was that even a thing? Still, I took it seriously and contacted my lawyer, Marianne, a fierce, no-nonsense legal bulldog who had dealt with more HOA nonsense than anyone I knew. After reading the letter, she rolled her eyes and said, "This isn't even real. It's a boilerplate lawsuit template pulled from the internet with her name slapped on it." But she agreed to file a response anyway and start collecting everything: footage, HOA permissions, my contract with the city's SafeLink program, everything that could prove Karen had no legal leg to stand on. But Karen wasn't done. The next morning, she held a press conference. Not with actual media, just her cousin with an iPhone and a Facebook live stream, but she made it look official. She stood in her driveway in a faux blazer with a homemade podium, complete with a banner that read, "Citizens Against Spy Cams." She rambled about digital oppression, neighborhood dignity, and how the Constitution protected her from facial recognition experiments. She even claimed I worked for the NSA. Her cousin panned the camera to my house dramatically, as if revealing some dark lair of espionage. The comments on her live stream were brutal. Most viewers were confused or mocking her, but she didn't seem to notice. She went on for 15 minutes, even taking fake questions from the air. Then, as she walked off the makeshift podium, she tripped over a garden hose and fell into her azalea bush. The camera kept rolling. The video hit 10,000 views in 2 hours and started circulating on local forums. Now Karen was mad. Not just HOA angry, publicly humiliated mad. The next thing I knew, she was back in the neighborhood group chat posting screenshots of fake legal statutes and ranting that anyone who shared the video was participating in slander through surveillance. She threatened to sue anyone who laughed at her spiritual trauma. People left the chat in droves. Meanwhile, Officer Rodriguez informed me that the footage from my camera had been accepted as official evidence and the city prosecutor's office was building a case. Karen's paint stunt had activated legal mechanisms she didn't even know existed. Because the camera was part of an active municipal pilot program, tampering with it could technically be considered interfering with a government initiative. If convicted, she could face fines and even community service. I wasn't out for blood. I just wanted peace and for my cameras to remain untouched. But it became increasingly clear that Karen wasn't going to let this go quietly. She had moved beyond neighborly annoyance and into full-blown conspiracy mode. She believed she was the victim of some grand digital scheme and that I was the villain. But as far as I was concerned, she was digging her own hole, and doing it while live streaming with terrible lighting and a cracked microphone. As I stood in my yard later that evening, adjusting one of the newer camera angles just to be safe, I saw her watching me from her window. She held binoculars and a notepad. I wasn't sure if she was spying or taking notes for her next live show. Either way, I didn't care. The footage was safe. The law was on my side. And Karen? She had no idea just how bad things were about to get. It had been just under a week since Karen launched her full-scale meltdown with paint, megaphones, lawsuits, and live streams, and while most of the neighborhood was trying to pretend everything was back to normal, I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind of person to give up once she latched onto a delusion. Her obsession with my cameras, with the HOA, with the idea that she was at the center of some vast surveillance conspiracy, it was only growing deeper. And that became painfully clear one morning when I noticed my network was acting strange. My system wasn't just designed for video capture, it also ran automated checks for potential digital breaches. And sure enough, an alert flagged a suspicious attempt to access the back end of the system. Not from outside the network like a traditional hack, but from inside the neighborhood. Someone was trying to break into my local server feed. I took a closer look at the metadata, ran a few trace commands, and narrowed the origin down to a nearby IP address. One that belonged to a household 3 doors down, an elderly couple who could barely operate their garage door remote. So it didn't take long to connect the dots. Karen was using someone else's Wi-Fi. The next day, I confirmed it by running a silent ping test while walking by their house. The signal spike was unmistakable. She had either convinced them to give her access or was piggybacking their open network. The real kicker came when I checked the script being used to probe my system. It wasn't written by Karen. It was written by someone who knew their way around basic brute force attack tools. Karen had help. So naturally, I dug deeper. I scanned the script's header comments, and to my amazement, I found a tag, RX Studios, along with a Discord handle. Out of sheer curiosity, I logged into an old Discord account I hadn't used in years and messaged the handle, pretending to be a buyer looking for someone to help take down surveillance. The guy responded within minutes. A teenager, probably 16 or 17, going by the name Rex. He asked what kind of system I was trying to hack. I sent a decoy screenshot. He replied, "That's easy stuff. Someone hired me last week to do something just like that for a lady freaking out about HOA cameras. She paid me with gift cards." That was all I needed to hear. The idea that Karen had gone from paintbrushes to cybercrime should have shocked me, but at this point, it was just another Tuesday in our absurd suburban war zone. I compiled the messages, screenshots, and trace logs and forwarded them to Officer Rodriguez. His response was short but perfect. Karen just went federal. While I waited for the police to take their next step, I decided to bring this insanity out into the open. The HOA had scheduled a board meeting that Saturday, and I requested to present a statement. Greg, the HOA president, looked both terrified and relieved when I offered to explain what had really been going on with the cameras, the SafeLink program, and Karen's escalation. Word spread fast, and when the meeting started, the room was packed. Even people who never showed up were sitting in the back with popcorn. I walked up to the small podium, plugged in my USB stick, and projected the footage on the HOA screen. First was the original camera feed. Karen in full daylight, on a ladder, vandalizing my cameras while muttering about neighborhood oppression. The room gasped, then chuckled. Then came the police cruiser footage showing the citation delivery and her sidewalk protest with the megaphone. Some of the older members shook their heads. A few actually applauded. But I wasn't done. Next, I displayed a digital timeline of the attempted cyber breach, tracing it from my system to the neighborhood IP, then showing the Discord conversation with Rex. I made sure to redact the personal address, keeping it clean and legal. Greg sat there slack-jawed, blinking like he was watching a courtroom drama unfold. I finished with the legal summary from my attorney, which outlined how Karen's actions weren't just harassment. They were criminal offenses tied to obstruction of a municipal program, digital trespassing, and illegal use of surveillance hacking tools. When I stepped down, the room stayed silent for a few moments. Then someone from the back yelled, "She did what?" followed by a flurry of whispered conversations and phones coming out. Karen, who had been watching from the hallway with her arms crossed, stormed into the room mid-meeting. "This is a smear campaign," she shouted. "He's manipulating all of you. He's spying on the whole block." Greg cleared his throat. "Karen, you were invited to make a statement. If you'd like to speak, please take the podium." She refused. Instead, she started shouting over him about how the HOA was conspiring with law enforcement to digitally enslave the neighborhood. She demanded the meeting be cancelled and called me a tech dictator. When someone in the audience whispered, "Does she think she's in a Marvel movie?" she snapped around and accused half the room of being CIA informants. Eventually, the HOA board voted to end the meeting early, but not before Greg announced they would hold a private session to review Karen's standing on the board. That meant potential suspension or removal, a first in HOA history. Karen stormed out, yelling something about constitutional warfare and petitioning the governor. I half expected her to announce a hunger strike on her front lawn. But the aftermath wasn't just board politics. That night, Karen's failed hacking attempt triggered a legal protocol. The teenager she hired, Rex, got contacted by his parents after officers showed up at their house asking questions. Apparently, he spilled everything. Admitted to working freelance for gift cards and that Karen specifically asked him how to turn off security feeds from the inside. This wasn't just meddling anymore. This was evidence of premeditated interference with city-connected systems. The next day, Karen was served with an official notice. She was under investigation for violating both HOA statutes and municipal cybersecurity regulations. Her reaction was almost cinematic. She filmed herself tearing the letter in half and throwing it into a lit barbecue grill while "We're not gonna take it" blared from a Bluetooth speaker in her driveway. Her cousin filmed the whole thing, and once again, it ended up online. But this time, the public wasn't laughing. Comments were turning against her. People were starting to realize she wasn't some quirky suburban rebel. She was dangerous and unhinged. I figured she might retreat for a while, maybe try to spin the story in her favor with another podcast episode or Instagram rant. Instead, I got a letter the next morning taped to my mailbox. It was handwritten in red ink and said, "You may have won this round, but justice is coming. I see everything." Underneath, she'd drawn a crude eye symbol with spikes. I honestly wasn't sure if she was threatening me or trying to curse me. But I was done playing defense. I met with my lawyer and the HOA's legal team, and we started preparing a civil complaint of our own. Harassment, digital intrusion, slander, public disturbance, and attempted system tampering. I even offered to waive the damages if she left the neighborhood entirely. But something told me she wouldn't go quietly. Karen wasn't the type to back down. She was the kind to escalate until the system itself had to force her hand. That's when Rodriguez called again. They had enough to bring formal charges. Between the footage, the hacking attempt, and Karen's public statements, they had what they needed to hand the case to the prosecutor. All I had to do was sign one more document confirming the camera network had been lawfully connected to the police SafeLink initiative. I signed it that evening. The same night the streetlights went out on our block for 10 full minutes. When they came back on, someone had spray painted over my garage door. One word. Traitor. Karen wasn't just desperate now. She was cornered. And when Karen feels cornered, the real chaos begins. The streetlight outage had been the final signal that Karen was unraveling faster than anyone had anticipated. The word traitor sprayed across my garage door in shaky, dripping red letters told me she wasn't just lashing out in public anymore, she was now operating in the shadows, petty and dangerous. I didn't even have to check the footage. I already knew it was her. She probably thought killing the lights would somehow disable my cameras, not realizing every one of them ran on independent battery backups and uploaded directly to a cloud server. I reviewed the footage, and sure enough, at 2:14 a.m., Karen had crept across the lawn in full camouflage pants and a hoodie, spray can in hand. She stopped just once to look directly into the camera, flipping the bird like it was some grand rebellion, then scrawled the word and vanished back into the dark. What she didn't know was that the footage had already been automatically flagged and sent to the police within minutes of the motion sensors activating. And since her actions violated the prior citation, this latest stunt tipped the whole situation into full criminal territory. By sunrise, the neighborhood was buzzing. Someone posted a picture of my garage to the community forum with the caption, "Karen strikes again?" And the replies were immediate. Some people asked if it was a prank. Others were furious, demanding Karen be banned from all HOA functions. A few thought it was fake, until I uploaded the night footage showing her mid-vandalism. That silenced any doubt. Within an hour, the HOA group chat had exploded into the most chaotic digital town hall I'd ever seen. People were sharing past experiences, some minor, some alarming, all centering around Karen's years of unhinged behavior. It was as if my camera system had become a catalyst, finally bringing to light what everyone had been too polite, or too afraid, to mention. Around mid-morning, I got another call from Officer Rodriguez. The prosecutor had reviewed everything, and a warrant was in motion. This time, not just for vandalism, but also for harassment, attempted network tampering, and obstruction of a municipal program. They would be sending officers that afternoon to carry out a formal search of her property and deliver the charges in person. I didn't ask what they were searching for, but I had a guess. The hacking instructions, the burner phones, maybe even more camera sabotage plans. Karen had treated this entire debacle like a war and her house like a bunker. She'd underestimated how long the law was willing to let her play that game. But in the short window between the early morning vandalism and the police arrival, Karen made her next move. She mailed letters. Not emails, not social media posts. Actual paper letters, hand-delivered to every mailbox in the neighborhood, including mine. Mine was folded in half and sealed with a red wax stamp that looked like a snake. Inside was a 3-page rant titled, "The Eye of Surveillance Has Blinded the Heart of Community." In it, she accused me of conspiring with federal agencies, manipulating the HOA, and turning the neighborhood into a digital prison. She called the cameras a virus and urged everyone to reclaim the block with analog courage. The final line read like a threat dressed as poetry. Those who stare through lenses may soon find themselves blind. Most neighbors either laughed or shook their heads, but the vibe had clearly shifted. People weren't scared anymore. They were annoyed, fed up. The same woman who used to host wine tastings and sign-up sheets for pet portraits had gone full cult leader in a matter of weeks, and now the whole neighborhood knew it. I got text after text from neighbors thanking me, saying they'd felt bullied into silence for years. Karen's grip was slipping, and she knew it. Around 2:30 p.m., 2 unmarked cars rolled up in front of her house. No sirens, no drama, just officers in plain clothes with folders in hand. I watched from a distance as they knocked on her door. She didn't answer at first. Then, 5 minutes later, The front door swung open and Karen emerged wearing a silver foil cape and sunglasses, claiming she had diplomatic immunity as a sovereign resident. She refused to let them in, so they presented her with the search warrant. She screamed that it was invalid, called them traitors, and at one point tried to take a selfie with one of the officers mid-discussion. When that didn't work, she attempted to retreat into the house and slam the door, only for the officers to legally stop her and follow protocol by entering the property. The moment they stepped inside, she started live-streaming again. The stream didn't go well for her. Her followers, most of whom were now just watching for entertainment, mocked her non-stop. She narrated the search like it was a raid in an action movie, even though the officers were calm and methodical, moving from room to room collecting what looked like electronics and printed documents. One of the officers eventually found what they came for, a notebook with what appeared to be diagrams of my house and notes like Cam 2 blind spot and night route. It was surreal. Karen had been treating this like a literal battle plan. After about an hour, the officers emerged with a few labeled evidence bags and gave her the formal notice. She was being charged. She screamed, demanded to speak to the president, then finally broke into tears on her front porch as they left. It wasn't a big dramatic arrest, but it was more damning than anything she had imagined. And the moment was recorded by a neighbor with a doorbell cam, which of course made it online. Within hours, the video of Karen wailing about freedom and facial recognition tyranny was viral. Local news picked it up. The story ran under the headline, HOA resident faces charges after painting over police-linked security cameras. From that point on, Karen went into overdrive trying to spin the story. She claimed the footage was edited. She claimed I bribed the HOA. She claimed the officers were actors hired by big tech. She even claimed the pink paint was anti-surveillance powder she had invented herself. But the internet didn't buy it. In fact, the more she posted, the worse it got. Her rant videos were edited into comedy skit. Someone auto-tuned one of her protests and turned it into a remix. I see everything, you can't see me became a TikTok trend. And while the internet laughed, the HOA took action. A special vote was held that weekend to determine whether Karen should be removed from the HOA board. The decision was unanimous. Not even her one friend on the board defended her. Greg read the motion out loud in front of a record crowd. 4 repeated violations of community guidelines, illegal actions, and conduct unbecoming of a board member, Karen Rothschild is hereby removed from her position effective immediately. She wasn't present. She had barricaded herself in her house and started recording a podcast titled, The Karen Chronicles. How I Fought the Surveillance State from My Lawn. I was finally starting to feel some peace. The cameras were secure. The legal action was progressing. The community had rallied. But just as I allowed myself to believe it was over, I got a notification from one of my motion sensors at the side gate. I checked the live feed. It wasn't Karen. It was a delivery man, carrying a huge sign. He propped it up against my fence and walked away. I went outside and read it. It said, "Warning, this man spies on you," in bold red paint. No name, no return address, just the message. I looked up. Karen was watching from her upstairs window with binoculars again. Her foil cape was gone, replaced with a hoodie that said, "Offline is freedom." I shook my head and took the sign down. As I turned back toward the house, my phone buzzed again. A different alert. This one from the police app one had built. A new clip had uploaded. Karen was back at it. Only this time, she had help. 2 masked figures were caught on camera the night before walking along the side of my house with a toolbox. One held a wire cutter. The other carried a laptop. She wasn't just spiraling anymore. She was recruiting. It was just past midnight when I sat in front of my security feed, rewinding and reviewing the latest footage for what felt like the 100th time. There they were again, 2 masked figures creeping through the side yard, moving like amateurs but determined. One held a laptop awkwardly in one hand while the other fumbled with wire cutters near the corner where my fiber optic line ran through a protective conduit. I'd reinforced it a week prior knowing Karen might escalate, and I was relieved to see they hadn't managed to get through the casing. Still, their presence confirmed the worst. Karen wasn't just spiraling into paranoia alone. She had convinced others to join her cause, whether they were friends, family, or simply as unhinged as she was. What she had started as a tantrum over cameras had now grown into something resembling a neighborhood insurgency. And I wasn't about to let it continue. I sent the footage to Officer Rodriguez immediately and copied the city's SafeLink program coordinator. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was attempted sabotage of city-partnered surveillance infrastructure. They took it seriously. Within hours, a task force had been briefed, and a team specializing in cyber-related crimes was assigned to conduct a more formal investigation. Karen's digital paper trail was deeper than even I had suspected. The teenager she'd hired before, Rex, had already given a sworn statement admitting Karen had tried to involve him again, offering more gift cards in exchange for disabling the spy grid, as she called it. But this time she had allegedly told him to bring backup. The masked visitors were likely Rex's friends, or worse, people she'd found online in one of the strange anti-tech forums she'd started frequenting. But while the legal gears turned, Karen didn't slow down. In fact, she became more visible. The next morning, she emerged from her home wearing what looked like a homemade militia uniform, complete with patches that read phrases like "Digital Freedom Fighter" and "Truth over Tech." She paraded up and down the sidewalk holding a tablet in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other, talking into it as though she were coordinating with some imaginary command post. Some neighbors stopped to watch. Others closed their curtains. Her cousin trailed behind filming the whole thing, narrating as though they were filming a documentary about civil rights. They weren't fooling anyone. By that afternoon, the HOA released a new official statement. Karen had been permanently banned from attending future meetings or voting in community decisions. She was also fined for the vandalism and disruptions caused by her unauthorized protest event. She, in turn, taped the notice to her garage door next to a giant printed QR code leading to her truth files, a series of PDF rants, photos of blurry street cameras, and one unhinged essay that tried to argue my dog Baxter was part of a facial recognition system. At this point, neighbors had stopped wondering if Karen might change and began treating her as more of a local hazard. One even started posting daily, "Karen Watch," updates on our community message board, complete with GIFs and sarcastic commentary. The next big shift came when the police executed a search warrant based on the footage from the masked attempt. They seized multiple electronic devices from Karen's home and her cousin's car, including a backup drive labeled Operation Blackout. According to Officer Rodriguez, it was filled with scanned HOA documents, handwritten surveillance notes, and bizarre sketches that made her look like she was planning an entire takeover of the neighborhood's electrical grid. They didn't find any actual tools capable of cutting the main lines or anything particularly advanced, but the intention was clear. Karen was documenting her obsession like a war general writing a memoir. And now, with evidence piling up, the prosecutor decided to take it to the next level. She was officially being charged with multiple counts of criminal mischief, conspiracy to commit digital sabotage, and repeated violations of a protective ordinance tied to the SafeLink initiative. Karen's reaction was predictable. She claimed she was being framed by a deep neighborhood state and uploaded a series of videos trying to explain how all of this had been planned to silence her. In one of them, she held a tomato and claimed it was a secret surveillance device planted by the HOA to monitor soil conditions near her garden. She told her followers that my cameras were actually portals for government mind control waves and that the QR code on her garage had been neutralized after a drone tried to scan it. I didn't even respond. There was no point. She wasn't trying to argue facts anymore. She was trying to stay relevant in her fantasy. The day of her court hearing arrived faster than any of us expected. By that time, she had alienated almost every neighbor, lost her position in the HOA, and become an internet punchline. Local news vans were parked across the street by 7 a.m. hoping to get footage of her departure. Karen, never one to miss a dramatic opportunity, stepped out dressed in what appeared to be a judicial robe with stickers of protest slogans all over it. She waved at the cameras and held up a handmade sign that said, "I'll see you in the truth court." Then she got in her cousin's car and was driven off. Everyone watched in silence, unsure whether to laugh or just be relieved. At court, things unraveled quickly. She interrupted the judge multiple times, refused to accept any responsibility, and demanded a jury of non-digital citizens. My attorney presented the footage, the logs, the threats, and the signed statements. Karen tried to object every few minutes until the judge finally warned her one more outburst would result in contempt. Eventually, she stood there quietly, visibly shaken as the prosecutor laid out the case in simple, cold facts. Her actions weren't just bizarre. They were unlawful, disruptive, and dangerous. The judge ruled that she would be placed under a community restraint order, fined, and required to complete psychiatric evaluation before being allowed to participate in any future HOA functions or speak at public neighborhood events. But what really sealed the moment was the footage the prosecutor ended the case with. It was a stitched-together compilation of her antics, presented not for humor, but to show the clear pattern of obsession, escalation, and retaliation. In it, Karen could be seen on the ladder painting the cameras, shouting through the megaphone, wearing the foil cape, waving spray cans, yelling at cops, recruiting the teen hacker, and narrating her protest with utter conviction. She looked less like a victim of injustice and more like a neighborhood menace spiraling into absurdity. When Karen returned home later that evening, she didn't say a word. No live streams, no capes, no flags. She walked into her house and closed the blind. And for once, she stayed quiet. The silence was so loud it almost felt strange. I took Baxter for a walk that evening and passed her house. Her cousin's car was gone. The lights were off. For the first time in weeks, it felt like a normal neighborhood again. But I wasn't done yet. As a final measure, the HOA agreed to let me install a permanent fixture at the community entrance. A new sign made of wood and steel, placed directly under the streetlights. It read, "Cameras active. Protected community. Footage streams live to local law enforcement." Below it, a plaque was engraved with a reminder. Security is not surveillance when transparency is respected. And then there was one last touch. Mounted next to the sign was a still-frame image printed on metal, a single snapshot from the footage of Karen mid-ladder, paintbrush in hand, mouth open mid-rant, just seconds before she realized she was on camera. It wasn't vindictive. It was a warning. The neighborhood called it the Karen Monument. She saw it the next day. I happened to be outside fixing my mailbox when she drove by slowly. Her window was rolled down, and for a moment, she looked like she might yell something. But she didn't. She just stared at the sign, then rolled up her window and drove off. Some battles end with explosions. Others end with silence. This one ended with a paintbrush and a camera. And Karen? She finally learned the hard way that sometimes the thing you try to destroy is the only thing keeping you out of real trouble.